Freddie Mercury was standing alone in the backstage corridor at Wembley Stadium on July 13, 1985, when something inside him finally cracked. The 18,000 fans were still roaring outside, the vibrations of their energy still pulsing through the concrete walls. But here, in this dim hallway lined with road cases and electrical cables, the most electrifying performer in rock history was falling apart. What happened in those 7 minutes would change everything he believed about himself. July 13, 1985. Wembley Stadium, London. The air backstage smelled of sweat, cigarette smoke, and the peculiar metallic scent that clings to large venues after massive crowds have filled them. Queen had just finished their 20-minute set at Live Aid, the global concert event that was being broadcast to nearly 2 billion people across 150 countries. Music history had just been written. Critics would later call it the greatest live performance in rock history. Freddie had commanded that stage like a conductor, leading an orchestra of humanity, his voice soaring, his presence magnetic, his every gesture a masterpiece of showmanship. He had worn his signature white tank top and studded armband, his black hair slicked back, his mustache perfectly trimmed. He had strutted, he had posed, he had made 72,000 people in the stadium and countless millions watching on television feel like he was singing directly to them. The energy had been transcendent, the connection, otherworldly. But what none of those millions knew was that Freddie Mercury was terrified. Not of the stage, not of the audience, not even of the colossal pressure of performing on the world's biggest platform. He was terrified of the emptiness that always came after. The moment when the lights dimmed, when the crowd's roar faded to echo, when he walked off that stage and back into the reality of being Farrokh Bulsara, the boy from Zanzibar who never quite felt like he belonged anywhere. In the weeks leading up to Live Aid, Freddie had been struggling. Queen was at a crossroads. The band had faced brutal criticism in recent years. Some called them bloated, overproduced, past their prime. Freddie had thrown himself into the performance with everything he had, partly because he wanted to prove the world wrong, but mostly because performing was the only time he felt fully alive, the only time the loneliness didn't crush him. Standing in the wings just before they went on, he had felt his hands trembling. Not from nerves about the performance itself, but from the knowledge that it would end, that the high would fade, that he would once again be alone with himself. His longtime partner had left him months earlier. The breakup had been devastating, though Freddie never spoke about it publicly. He had spent years building walls around his heart, performing confidence, performing joy, performing invincibility. But inside those walls, he was crumbling. The performance had been perfect, every note, every gesture, every moment of connection. As he sang, "We Are the Champions," and the entire stadium swayed as one organism, tears had stung his eyes behind his sunglasses. "This is what I was born to do," he thought. "This is the only place I make sense." But now it was over. Brian, Roger, and John had headed to the hospitality area, still buzzing with adrenaline, already hearing the praise pouring in from other artists and producers. Freddie had told them he needed a moment, that he'd join them shortly. He had walked down this corridor instead, past crew members who nodded and smiled, past journalists trying to catch his attention, past the chaos and celebration. He had found this quiet stretch of hallway, pressed his back against the cold concrete wall, and felt something inside him break. The tears came first. Silent, hot tears that streamed down his face, cutting through the stage makeup still clinging to his skin. His breathing became shallow, rapid. His chest tightened. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his knees pulled to his chest, his arms wrapped around them. For a man who had just given the performance of a lifetime, he looked utterly destroyed. This was the private moment no one was meant to see. Freddie Mercury, the showman who never showed weakness, the performer who made confidence look effortless, reduced to a broken figure on a backstage floor. He wasn't crying from joy or exhaustion. He was crying from the crushing weight of loneliness, from the terror of his own mortality, from the unbearable gap between who he was on stage and who he felt like inside. What he didn't know was that someone was watching. Cassian Merritt was a 29-year-old stage technician who had been working concerts for 7 years. He had seen hundreds of artists, worked with dozens of major acts and prided himself on his professionalism. His job was to move equipment, manage cables, ensure smooth transitions. His job was not to intrude on artists' private moments. But when he turned the corner and saw Freddie Mercury sitting on the floor, shoulders shaking with silent sobs, Cassian stopped. Every instinct told him to turn around, to leave the man to his privacy. But something else, something deeper, told him to stay. Cassian had his own demons. 2 years earlier, his younger brother had taken his own life. Cassian had been the one to find him. The grief had nearly destroyed him. He had thrown himself into work, into constant motion, into anything that would keep him from feeling the gaping hole his brother had left. He had learned to recognize the signs of someone drowning. And right now, watching one of the most famous men in the world crumbled on a backstage floor, Cassian recognized those signs. He approached slowly, his footsteps deliberately audible so he wouldn't startle Freddie. When he was about 10 feet away, he stopped. Freddie looked up, his eyes red-rimmed, mascara streaked down his cheeks. For a moment they just looked at each other. Then Freddie spoke, his voice raw and barely above a whisper. "Please don't tell anyone." Cassian took another step closer. "Tell anyone what? I just saw someone who needed to sit down for a minute." Freddie let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Is it that obvious?" "That you're human," Cassian said gently. "Yeah, it's pretty obvious." Freddie wiped at his face with the back of his hand, smearing the makeup further. "I just performed for 2 billion people. I should be celebrating. Instead, I'm having a breakdown in a hallway." Cassian moved closer, then sat down on the floor a few feet away from Freddie, his back against the opposite wall. "My brother killed himself 2 years ago," he said, the words surprising even himself. He never talked about this. "I found him. And you know what I learned? The biggest performances, the brightest smiles, they're usually covering the deepest pain." Freddie stared at him. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be," Cassian said. "I'm telling you because I recognize what I'm seeing right now. You're drowning. And you're drowning alone because everyone thinks you're too strong to need help." The silence that followed was heavy but not uncomfortable. Finally, Freddie spoke again. "I don't know how to be just me. I only know how to be Freddie Mercury, the performer. And when I'm not performing, I don't know who I am." Cassian nodded slowly. "My brother said something similar in one of his last letters. He said he felt like he was always performing the role of being okay. That he didn't know how to actually be okay." Freddie's eyes filled with fresh tears. "How do you survive it? The loss?" "Honestly," Cassian said, "some days I don't. Some days I just get through minute by minute. But what helps is remembering that my brother didn't die because he was weak. He died because he was suffering and he thought he had to suffer alone. And I promised myself I'd never let anyone else feel that alone if I could help it." Something extraordinary was happening in that hallway. 2 strangers, separated by fame and circumstance, were connecting at the deepest human level. The artifice, the performance, the masks they both wore for the world, all of it had fallen away. Freddie took a shuddering breath. "I'm so tired," he said quietly. "I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of being strong. I'm tired of being alone." Cassian moved closer, closing the distance between them until he was sitting beside Freddie. "Then stop. Just for right now, stop. You don't have to be Freddie Mercury. You don't have to be strong. You can just be a person who's hurting, and I'll just be another person who gets it." Freddie looked at him, really looked at him, and something in his expression shifted. "Why are you being so kind to me?" "Because 2 years ago, I wish someone had been this kind to my brother," Cassian said simply. "And because you need it. And because it costs me nothing to sit here with you for as long as you need." They sat in silence for several minutes. The sounds of celebration echoed from elsewhere in the building, but here, in this corridor, there was only quiet companionship. Finally, Freddie spoke again, his voice stronger now. "What was your brother's name?" "Elliot," Cassian said. "Elliot Merritt. He was 24. He was studying architecture. He loved old buildings and terrible jokes." Freddie smiled through his tears. "Tell me one of his terrible jokes," Cassian laughed. "Why don't scientists trust atoms?" Freddie shook his head. "I don't know. Why?" "Because they make up everything." Freddie laughed, a real, genuine laugh that seemed to surprise him. That is truly awful. I know, Cassian said, grinning. He had hundreds of them, drove everyone crazy. Freddie wiped his face again, more deliberately now, trying to clean up the smeared makeup. I wish I'd met him. I think he'd have loved your music, Cassian said. He played Bohemian Rhapsody so many times, my mum wanted to break the record. They sat together a while longer, the urgency and panic that had consumed Freddie slowly ebbing away. Finally, Freddie stood, offering his hand to help Cassian up. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You have no idea what you just did for me. Cassian stood. I think I do. Someone did something similar for me once, when I was at my worst. Paid it forward, you know. Freddie nodded, then did something unexpected. He pulled a small notebook and pen from his back pocket, scribbled something quickly and tore out the page. He handed it to Cassian. This is my private number. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call me. And if you ever need to talk about Elliot, I'll listen. Cassian took the paper, staring at it in disbelief. Freddie, you don't have to. I want to, Freddie interrupted firmly. You gave me something precious tonight. You saw me at my worst and didn't judge me. You reminded me that I'm human, that it's okay to be human. That's worth more than any performance ever will be. The two men stood there, and in that moment, a genuine bond formed. Then Freddie straightened his shoulders, took a deep breath, and transformed. It was subtle but unmistakable. The performer was returning. But this time there was something different in his eyes, a recognition that the performance and the person could coexist. That vulnerability wasn't weakness. I should probably go face the chaos, Freddie said with a small smile. I'm sure Brian is wondering where I disappeared to. Cassian nodded. Go knock 'em dead. Again. Freddie started to walk away, then turned back. Cassian, thank you for seeing me. The real me. Anytime, Freddie. Freddie Mercury walked back toward the celebration, his shoulders straighter, his breathing steadier. Behind him, Cassian Merritt stood in that hallway, holding a piece of paper with a phone number, and felt something shift in his own grief. For the first time since Elliot's death, helping someone else had helped him. What nobody knew at the time was how profoundly that 7-minute encounter would resonate through both their lives. Cassian did call that number 3 weeks later at 2 a.m. on the anniversary of Elliot's death. He had been sitting in his apartment, staring at old photographs, drowning in memories. He hadn't really expected anyone to answer, but Freddie did. They talked for 2 hours about loss, about loneliness, about the terrifying business of being human, about Elliot and his terrible jokes, about Freddie's fear of disappearing into his own persona, about grief and joy and everything in between. It became a tradition. They would call each other, sometimes once a month, sometimes once a week, never predictably, just whenever one of them needed to hear another human voice that understood. Cassian never sold the story, never told the press, never exploited the friendship, and Freddie never forgot the man who had sat with him on a backstage floor when he was falling apart. In 1987, Freddie learned he was HIV positive. The diagnosis was devastating, terrifying, and isolating in ways that compounded all his existing fears about mortality and loneliness. One of the first people he told, outside his closest circle, was Cassian. They met at Freddie's London home, Garden Lodge, on a grey November afternoon. Freddie was thinner, quieter, but still unmistakably himself. I'm scared, Freddie admitted, sitting in his elegant living room surrounded by beautiful things that suddenly seemed meaningless. I know, Cassian said. Remember when you asked me how I survive? Minute by minute, Freddie. And you don't do it alone. You have people who love you. Let them in. Freddie nodded, tears in his eyes. I'm trying. Cassian stayed for hours. They didn't talk much about the disease. Instead, they talked about everything else. About music Freddie wanted to create. About the garden Freddie was cultivating. About a trip to Japan that Freddie had loved. About Elliot, and how grief changes over time but never disappears. Before Cassian left, Freddie gave him something. It was a small framed photograph from Live Aid, showing Freddie on stage, arm raised, commanding the crowd. On the back, Freddie had written, "To Cassian, who reminded me that the person matters more than the performance. Thank you for seeing me. Always, Freddie." Freddie Mercury died on November 24, 1991. Cassian, like millions around the world, mourned. But he also understood something that most fans didn't. He understood that Freddie had spent his life performing, yes, but he had also spent it searching for genuine connection, for people who saw beyond the persona to the tender, vulnerable human beneath. Years later, in 1997, Cassian established the Elliott Merritt Foundation, an organization dedicated to suicide prevention and mental health awareness for creative professionals. Performers, artists, musicians, people who spent their lives creating joy for others while sometimes drowning in their own pain. At the foundation's opening ceremony, Cassian told the story of meeting Freddie Mercury, not the sensational version, not the celebrity breakdown version, but the human version, the story of two broken people finding each other in a moment of crisis and offering each other the rarest gift: being seen. The foundation grew over the years, helping thousands of artists access mental health resources, creating safe spaces for performers to be vulnerable, to be human, to ask for help without fear of judgment. On its 20th anniversary, Brian May, Queen's guitarist and Freddie's longtime friend, attended as guest of honor. Afterward, he approached Cassian privately. "Freddie told me about you," Brian said quietly. "About that night at Live Aid. He said you saved his life in that hallway." Cassian shook his head. "I didn't save his life. I just sat with him." "Sometimes," Brian said, "that's the same thing. And I want you to know that what you did that night, the kindness you showed him, it mattered. He carried it with him. He talked about it. How you reminded him that it was okay to be human, that vulnerability wasn't weakness." They stood together, two men connected by love for someone who had touched millions, but had struggled to feel truly seen. "He gave me something too," Cassian said. "He showed me that helping someone else could help heal my own grief. That connection is what saves us." Today, the Elliott Merritt Foundation operates in 14 countries. It has helped more than 50,000 artists access mental health support. Every year on July 13th, the anniversary of Live Aid, the foundation hosts The Human Moment, an event where performers are encouraged to speak openly about their struggles, their fears, their moments of breaking down backstage when everyone thinks they should be celebrating. The lesson that Freddie Mercury and Cassian Merritt taught each other in 7 minutes on a concrete floor has rippled outward, touching countless lives. That we are all, beneath the performances we give for the world, just humans trying to survive our own pain. That the greatest gift we can offer each other is presence, compassion, and the reminder that we don't have to be strong all the time. That being seen, truly seen, in our most vulnerable moments is worth more than any applause ever will be. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that even the strongest people sometimes need a hand to hold in the dark, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it today. Subscribe to this channel for more stories about the beautiful, messy, heartbreaking, and hopeful reality of being human. And tell us in the comments, who in your life has sat with you in your darkest moment? Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply show up for each other. We'll be back soon with more stories that matter. Until then, be kind to yourself and be kind to each other.